Hi, my name's Alice Forrest. I'm a marine biologist and a wildlife guide. For the last year or so, I've been living here in my home of Byron Bay on the east coast of Australia, mostly working as a whale watching guide. Usually I work in places like Antarctica and the Arctic, and I'm about to head over to the west coast of Australia to work with whale sharks, manta rays and humpback whales as a snorkel guide, which I'm really looking forward to. Before this, I mostly was a scientist studying plastic. I looked at plastic pollution in the ocean and inside fish that people are eating. So how much plastic is inside our seafood was mostly what I was studying. After working as a scientist for a while, I realized that for me the most important way we could all make a difference on the planet is maybe not so much through science, even though that's very important, but the most important part is communication and people understanding that science and understanding the tools to make a difference. The reason I do what I do as a scientist and as a science communicator and wildlife guide is just because I really love the ocean. I think it is incredibly magical and amazing. I'm constantly blown away that no matter how many times I get in the water, I usually see something new or learn something new. There's always amazing things to be found. And to me, it just seems like the most magical place on our planet. It's also most of our planet. Most of our planet is water. If you look at it from space, it's a big blue dot. And most of the air we breathe is coming from the ocean. So it's not just beautiful and fascinating and this magical wonderland, but it's also so vital for us and for our existence. So I'm just obsessed with the ocean and all the animals that live in there. Right now my favorite are probably the humpback whales, mostly because I think they're so mysterious, and I love that when you look in their eye you can really just see them looking back, and I think there's so much for us still to learn about their intelligence and their cultures. So by now we know that plastic pollution is one of the biggest issues facing our oceans and all of the wildlife. I'm sure you've all seen those pictures of animals tangled in plastic. You've probably seen beaches covered in trash. But what many of us don't know is that the smaller pieces are maybe the biggest problem. So when plastic ends up in the ocean, it just never goes away. It breaks down to smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller pieces. And those pieces have been documented inside pretty much everything from tiny little animals at the bottom of the deepest ocean right up to humpback whales, corals, fish, and of course people. So we know that the plastic is getting to every level of the ocean, and we know that we're just starting to understand the impacts of this. So plastic itself is made with a range of chemicals, pollutants, and it also absorbs pollutants while it's floating in the ocean. So then all those potentially harmful toxins are being introduced into the food chain, they're moving up the food chain, and ultimately the biggest predators kind of accumulate those loads of toxins, including us at the top of the food chain. So those microplastics are a really big issue, even though they are very small. So we know that bigger pieces of plastic, like bags or bottles, when they end up in the ocean, fragment into lots and lots of small pieces. But there's another source of microplastics. They can also come basically with all the wastewater entering the ocean, and that's tiny little beads from things like exfoliating face washes or toothpastes. It's also things like the fibers from polyester clothing. One waterproof jacket could shed several thousand fibers when it's washed, and all of those head out into the sea. The good news though is that we have all the solutions we need. This plastic problem is relatively new. A generation ago we weren't just consuming and throwing away plastic items, and now increasingly we're all aware that it just doesn't make sense to make items that are thrown away out of a material that can last forever. We're starting to learn more about microfibers, microbeads, bigger plastics, and how to design better. So because we have all the solutions we need, we can all be part of creating that change, and there's a few different ways this can happen. The first thing is individual change. So this means all of us trying to cut out the plastics in our life. If we don't use a plastic item, there's no way it can end up inside a turtle or a whale. And so that's just trying to avoid single-use plastics wherever possible. So getting reusable items like a reusable drink bottle, reusable bags, trying to avoid snacks that are packaged in plastic, so things like chips, maybe swap that out for a piece of fruit. Individual change is just the start though, so it's important to consider that most of these changes need to also happen at a bigger level. So what that means is business and government also need to change. And even though those huge superpowers often seem out of our control, there's actually a lot we can do. Maybe even contact businesses in your local area that have things like takeaway cups, straws, bags, and talk to them about why you think that's not a good idea in your community. There's a group in Bali called Bye Bye Plastic Bags. It was started by 2 teenage girls and now has literally changed the face of Bali. They now work with the government. They have completely changed the laws in Bali around plastic, and just the 2 of them with a petition have made a huge difference. So just don't underestimate how much you can do.